So I've got a concept for a video. It's really a collection of thoughts and ideas. We'll see how well I can articulate it, and maybe I can edit it together and might help a few people to understand some things that I've been understanding. What we're going to talk about is one of the most fundamental parts of being a human being, and one of the most fundamental elements of the illusion of physical reality, and being a human in particular in this physical reality. So it's the name. Now I take the word name to mean na me. It breaks down to na me, as in not me. The name is not me. And the name is really just a word, it's just a sound. And it's a sound that gets your attention. And before there was legality and birth certificate registration and all that, people still had names, obviously. Probably as long as there's been language, people have had names. But the name is not me. The first thing that happens when you're born and you kind of, you take your first breaths, you meet your parents, probably in that very moment, they're going to give you your name and start referring to you as that name. And for the rest of your life, you are going to identify as that sound, maybe one or two or a few syllables. And a lot of us shorten our names to one or two syllables. And you don't really give it any thought. And I know I certainly didn't. It wasn't until I was, I'm going to say a few years ago now, when I got into this idea of legal name fraud and birth certificate fraud. And obviously when you're born, it's not just that you're given a name for the purposes of getting your attention when someone wants to speak to you. It's you have to have a name so that you can be entered into the system, and you have to have two names. You have to have a surname as well. But from that day forth, as soon as you're here, there is a birth certificate signed and you're registered into the system. Just like that. And so I started researching what all of this means. And I'm already thinking in terms of the name is not me. It's not who I am. There is no way that a syllable or a few syllables can sum up the entirety of what you are, and even what you are consciously aware of being, right? And if you start to tap into what you are outside of this level of awareness, there is no name for that. There's absolutely no way you can have a name for what we truly are. So this topic of the legal name and the birth certificate and everything that goes along with it goes hand in hand with the inward journey towards self-discovery and towards discovering what the truth of being a human being is. And for me, it really was brought into full realization, full stark contrast, when I was confronted by a friend with this idea that if you're opposed to how things are done in the system, in society, and it's a free society, which we love to remind ourselves constantly, surely then you're free to opt out at any time from any part of this thing, as long as you don't steal or break anything or damage anything or harm anyone, do any kind of real harm to anyone. Surely the system has to say, okay, you just don't want to play the game, that's fine, you go off and you do your own thing. That's how it should be. I would say that would include paying taxes. Paying taxes in a free system is a voluntary thing. It is not something that they can force you to do. But one of the key things to remember is this system doesn't control. It doesn't attempt to control us through force or even the threat of force. What it does is it predominantly uses deception. So when I said, you know what, I can't file a tax return, I can't pay tax because I know what they're using that money for, because I've watched the news and I've seen the confessional where they say we're bombing people, we're invading Iraq. They were invading Iraq when I was thinking about all this kind of stuff. We're killing innocent people, we're blowing up schools and hospitals. So to cut a long story short, I decided that I wasn't going to pay tax. It was me and a few friends. We were all getting into this kind of idea together. We're not going to pay tax. What we're going to do is we're going to write to HMRC and say, this is why I'm not filing a tax return, unless you can reassure me that the money I provide is not being used for, you know, nefarious purposes. If I wrote to them again now, I'd be a lot more specific, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was getting into, so I was pretty vague about the whole thing, and I regret that, but should have waited a bit longer maybe. But the thing was, I registered self-employed, so I was expected to submit a tax return, and I had no intent of doing this because of what I'd uncovered and what I'd learned. So we went with the tax rebellion, and obviously they don't write to you, and this is the first thing that's odd. Now, we all know nowadays how much they love to do things online. They want you to make an online account, do it all online, don't talk to a human being, don't even pick up the phone nowadays. It's like, do it, you know, just do it, just talk to our computers. But when it comes to money, when it comes to you actually writing a letter and something to do with law courts, right? You going into a law court and saying something in your own voice in English is meaningless. That's why you need a lawyer, because they can speak the language that you can't. They can speak legalese. But it's all about paperwork and documents, and that's important. So when you create a document, a letter, they have to take notice of it first and foremost, especially if you send it recorded delivery. You should always send these things recorded delivery. And they have to respond, which you would expect, because these are public servants we're talking about, right? And this is theoretically how this society operates. It's part of the game. So they owe you a response. They owe you an explanation. And they should do what they can to answer your questions, but they won't. What they do instead is they just quote statute at you. They go, here is the statute regulation that says you must file a tax return. Now bloody do it. And at that point, I'm like, well, try me. Let's see what you've got. You know, it's like a poker game. They've called my bluff, so I'm calling their bluff. I don't play cards, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's like a game. At least a human being was writing to me. That's all I thought. And I told them the score, like I say, not in too much detail, not in too much depth, but I said I'm clearly not going to pay tax, and I want some reassurance here that this money is not being used for nefarious purposes. You don't use the name, you don't call yourself Mr., and you don't use the full legal name, because that is not you. They only have power over that full legal name and you, and they only have it if you give consent. So back then I was writing to them as I was using my middle name as my surname. I dropped my family name as a surname completely. I dropped Mr. So I was just my first name and my middle name in place of a surname. That's how I was writing to them. And when they wrote back to me, they didn't really know who to write to. They didn't know whether to write to my original name, my legal fiction name, because the people, they don't know any of this.
The critical thing here is that we are not refusing to pay tax. We are not refusing to submit a tax return. What we have in fact done is sent a legal notice of conditional acceptance of our duty or responsibility to pay tax. Conditionally accepting something in this manner means you still have every intention of doing it once the stipulated conditions have been fulfilled.
So that's where we leave it. That's where it stands. And that took place in 2015. It's 4 years. 4 years have gone by, and all I've had is computer printouts that just keep reminding me, you have not submitted a tax return for the period 2015-2016. You have not submitted a tax return for the period 2016-2017. You have not blah, blah, blah. And they are never going to bring someone into a courtroom for writing a letter and saying, I'm not paying tax because I don't want the money to go towards military expenditure. If they were going to bring you into court for that, they would have to say that you must contribute money to illegal invasions and to killing, because that's what was happening at that time. And that's never been resolved as far as I'm concerned. They've never done anything. They've never created new legislation or put safeguards in place to make sure that the kind of heinous stuff that was happening in the wake of 9/11, with that as a justification, the need to fight terrorism, they've never put anything in place to try and stop that. They've never punished the people involved. That's still ongoing, and that's a good enough reason to withhold tax for any right-thinking man or woman. This situation still exists right now, and you never know what's around the corner, okay? It's a relatively peaceful time right now, but you never know what's around the corner. And going through this whole process of writing to them and telling them how it was. This is how I see it. This is how it is. Can you tell me otherwise? And they couldn't, because they're just office workers. They're button pushers. And they try and enforce it just by writing nasty letters to you. That's all they've got is intimidation. They've got nothing. And that really cemented it for me. That was like, okay, this isn't just some internet meme. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is reality. This is what's actually happening. And let them drag me into a courtroom. Let them send police officers to bring me into court. If I've broken the law, bring me into court. And of course they didn't, because I haven't broken the law. I'm going to show you a document now. Obviously I live in the woods. I don't have a postal address, but the last postal address I had, my friends still live there. So whenever the HMRC, whenever they write to me, I do get the letters. So I'm going to show you a digital scan of this I've made where I've blanked out my legal name. So I've got 2, and I must receive maybe between 2 and 4 bits of paperwork in brown envelopes like this every year. It's always just a thing saying, this is the amount that you now owe us. Fill it out. There's nothing nasty on these things, and there's always a bank gyro credit slip at the bottom, and you're meant to just fill it out and go and pay it like a good little slave, basically. And of course we're not doing that. We're putting it straight in the recycling. And one of them I opened, it's from April 2019, and this one was different, very, very different. They were talking about thousands of pounds, not in tax, because they don't know how much tax you owe until you declare it. It's a self-incriminating system, okay? You have to declare your earnings. But these are just fines. These are fines for not submitting tax returns. They create that fine so that they've got something to come after you for, so that they've got something to intimidate you with. But this one came and it said, amount due by the 2nd of May 2019, £100. And I was like, hang on a minute. It was thousands last time. Now it's £100. And what it says here, 28th of February 2018, brought forward from previous statement. Balance £3,379.98. That was the maximum amount of fines that they ever managed to clock up against me, because I just ignored their letters, refused to answer their letters. And the reason I refused is because a human being never wrote to me, and I'm a human being, and I only interact with human beings. I only deal with human beings. Computers don't mean to me. Legal fiction entities like the HM Revenue and Customs doesn't mean anything to me. What they're doing here, amount not currently being pursued. And then you've just got tax due column, minus 100, minus 900, minus 400. Balance keeps going down on the right hand column. Interest, minus £79.98. Got down to 0. They dropped every single penalty that they had fictionally created against my legal fiction personality. This is all imaginary. It's all happening in a computer. No human being has even looked at this. It's just a computer figuring all this out, a piece of software. And then they put the late filing penalty for 2017, 2018, £100. And basically what they're saying is, come back into the system, we'll drop the over £3,000 debt, and you can just pay us £100 and then just come back into the system like a good little sheep, like a good little slave. And I chose to ignore it, and we carried on as usual. I'm still waiting for a human being to write to me, the human being. And I call myself Jason now, so they don't even know to write to Jason, do they? They're still going to be writing to my old slave name, my old legal fiction. In an ideal world, I might have chosen to have no name at all. I might have chosen the sound that water makes as it flows over rocks in a stream bed. I might have chosen the sound that the wind makes as it moves through the branches of a tree. Do you know what I mean? That's a much nicer sound than Tim or Bobby or Jason. But I chose Jason because that was always the name that I thought that I might give to my son if I ever had a son. And I thought, why would I choose the name Jason? Well, it's because it's a name that maybe I would like to have myself. And then I realised that the reason that name had come to me, because it was the name I was supposed to call myself. As within, so without. As we're changing, as we're transforming, we change on the outside, we change our name. It's just a symbol, it's just a sound to summon our attention, but that's it. So whatever they're writing to in these letters, that's not me. That is not me anymore.
This has been a painful yet critical part of my journey towards self-awareness. I see the system, and indeed everything artificial which we have built in the world, as the collective outward manifestation of all our egoic minds. Those of us outwardly in rebellion of some form or another against any kind of assumed authority are those of us who are doing the inner work on becoming free of the bureaucracy of our own mind. We project it outwards to have it mirrored back in order to experience it, transmute it, and ultimately re-assimilate it. Thank you for watching.